Okay, we are back. We're going to take a look at a ball that is traveling from, as you guys are looking at it, from left to right, and the air molecules are going past it from right to left. It's got a backspin. So with a backspin, think about a paddle wheel. So on top, what's happening are the air molecules are being dragged, especially by the seams of the baseball or softball. So the ball is basically turning like this. And as it's moving, the air molecules on top are going faster. The air molecules on the bottom are going slower. Part of the reason we know this is that there's going to be more turbulence underneath the ball. So that's going to exaggerate that pressure difference. So this is how turbulence actually helps in terms of creating a pressure difference and therefore a larger amount of force. So let's look at the baseball. It's kind of a creepy noise. So as it's turning, the air molecules are moving faster on top, slower in the bottom. You can almost see them piling up here. And that is going to be creating higher pressure on the bottom, lower pressure on top. So with a backspin, the ball tends to rise. This happens especially a lot with golf balls and also a fastball. If a softball pitcher or a major league or college baseball pitcher can throw a fastball with a lot of backspin, and we're talking about 3,500 RPMs or something like that, about 25 to 3,500 RPMs, then that ball is actually going to rise a little bit or appear to rise. In other words, it won't fall nearly as rapidly. So there you see the turbulence underneath, more laminar flow on top. That's creating or contributing to this pressure difference, and then we're in pretty good shape. So the next thing we're going to do is, I think I can go straight to this video. Oh my gosh. That's the physics girl video. Let's see if this is going to work. It should be. Let's take a look at it.
We were at this event the other day, and I saw a guy kick a ball. I was distraught over the curved trajectory of the ball. How do they do that? And since you can't get good at soccer using physics, I'd better consult a friend. Kyle! Kyle, I want to be able to bend it.
Okay,
so bend it like Beckham. It means we're going to make the ball curve. And so we're going to put a side spin on it. You're going to see in just a second. And the rough surface of the soccer ball is going to drag air molecules. It's going to throw some of the air molecules behind it. And as we're going to look at it to the right, that's going to cause the ball to start curving towards the left. So some of that is what we call air wrapping. And then the effect or the cause really of the curvature will be the air molecules being thrown to one side, causing a force to be generated and the ball to curve in the opposite direction. So we're going to see that in just a second. We also got Bernoulli's principle going on, but we think that's actually a modest part of this total Magnus effect.
so look, I bet you that I can take this ball, set it in that corner, and bend it into that goal.
So I'm skeptical about this because you can't even see the opening of the goal. All you can see is the goalpost. And from the vector that you trace from the corner to... It's magic! No, it's physics. Do it again.
Ah.
So remember to do this. Oh, he's got that foot plant. That's really just about perfect. So somewhat similar to kicking a field goal, you've got to get that just right. And then we're going to have that hip flexion followed by knee extension. So we have the kinematic chain going on. Really, really great. So what we're going to see is anytime you want to generate spin or rotation, you've got to produce an off-center force. So his foot is going to hit the side of the soccer ball. And it's going to cause it to go forward, but it's also going to cause it to rotate or spin. And as it's spinning, it's going to be throwing air molecules behind and to the right. That's going to cause the ball to go to the left. Okay, let's check it out. Slow-mo there, yeah.
How did you do that?
Well, it's a pretty standard technique in soccer to use the inside of your foot to generate
Okay, so you can see here's the off-center force. Here's the center of the soccer ball. That's going to generate torque. So we have a force that's some distance away from the center because the soccer ball is light. It doesn't have a lot of mass. It's not very dense. It's actually relatively easy to make it spin and also to create this Magnus effect. It doesn't have a lot of inertia because it doesn't have a lot of mass. So let's check it out.
Spin on the ball. That spin is actually going to make the ball curve into the goal.
Let's take a look at how that happens. As Kyle kicks the ball with his right foot on the right side, he imparts a spin on the ball. The ball traveling in this direction means air is flowing across it in the opposite direction. But right near the ball, there is a thin layer of air dragged around. As oncoming streams of air pass the ball, the side moving in the same direction as the spinning ball is accelerated, follows the curve of the ball, and is deflected off to the right. The side that is moving against the spinning ball meets opposing air and can't continue around the ball. It slows down and goes straight. We end up getting a net flow of air to the right, and the ball must move left.
Wait, that's Newton's third law.
Yes, thank you, Kyle. Just like a rocket, if you push a gas one direction, namely downwards out of the rocket, then the rocket has to go up.
So what you're saying is my shot is like a rocket.
Yes. Thank you, Kyle. Like the rocket, as the air moves in one direction, the ball has to go the other direction. Also, since the air is slowing down on the right side, you get a buildup of air, which creates a higher pressure on that side and pushes the ball to the left. The airflow is extremely important. You could not make this kick in a vacuum. It's not some weird thing the ball does to itself to curve. You need air flowing across the ball to push the ball. This is called the Magnus effect.
So you can use this phenomenon to do all sorts of shots in soccer. As we already saw, I can use the inside of my foot to make the ball curve left. I can also use the outside of my foot to make the ball spin the other way, and then it curves right. If I wanted to, I could even hit the bottom of the ball, give it backspin, and send it up into the air.
With a backspin, it's actually going to curve upwards.
Finally, if I want to get real tricky with it, I can put no spin on it at all, like a knuckleball. When this happens, you get turbulence.
Yeah, that's really cool because the ball isn't spinning. I don't know if you remember thinking about moment of inertia, where L, or moment of inertia, is equal to, or angular momentum, sorry, is equal to the moment of inertia times the angular velocity. As we increase the angular velocity, we increase the angular momentum. And angular momentum actually helps to stabilize the ball. So it actually makes it easier if the ball's spinning, to make it turn or curve. With a knuckleball, what happens is it becomes very unstable. The air or turbulence as it's going over the ball, because it's got a rough surface, could make it dart to the left, right, up, down, usually some combination thereof.
Unpredictable on both sides of the ball, and the keeper doesn't know where it's going.
Should we try the knuckleball?
That one's going to be a little tougher.
That's the physics.
Okay, so let's go back to, hold on, I'm going to pause our recording. Okay, hope that's working. So we're back to our PowerPoint slide. So again, this combination of Bernoulli's principle, especially the air wrapping, Newton's third law, is going to help that ball spin. So let's take a look. Let's go to the next slide. There we go. So with the Magnus effect, the surface of the ball becomes really important. There's a number of factors that can affect the amount of curvature. The rougher it is. So for example, the seams and the felt on a tennis ball, the seams on a softball or a baseball, increase the roughness of the surface. The rougher it is, the greater the pressure difference, because you can create more turbulence, you can drag more air behind it, you can create a larger Bernoulli effect. That means you're going to have a greater Magnus force. So pitchers used to sometimes, allegedly, would maybe put some little sandpaper on the ball or a quote unquote foreign object if the ref or umpire didn't catch them, and try to throw a curveball that had a lot more movement on it. So as we get, I'm trying to do something else at the same time, prepare next video. There we go. The mass of the ball is important. So something like a shot put is really heavy. It's 16 pounds for the men, 12 pounds for the women. Something that has a lot of mass and something that has a very smooth surface is not going to curve very much. Really difficult to throw a curveball with either a shot put or like a cue ball or a 3 ball or a 9 ball if you're playing billiards. So don't try it. They won't curve very well. So the smaller the smaller the ball is, the smoother the ball is, the greater the amount of mass and the more dense it is, the less it's going to curve. So density, again, is important. It's easier, this is a softball, easier to make a softball curve than it is a baseball to curve. Baseball is a bit more dense. It takes higher RPMs to be able to do it. The other advantage is the radius of a softball. Baseball is a little bit bigger than this tennis ball. A softball has another advantage. The radius, the size is larger. The bigger the ball, the easier it is to make it spin. So here's something even I can make spin. That's a beach ball. Put a little back spin or side spin on it. You can get it to go wherever you want to. You can make it curve like crazy. So the bigger the radius, the greater the amount of curvature. The smaller the density, the greater the amount of curvature. The rougher the surface, the greater the amount of curvature. The less mass there is in the ball or object, the less dense it is, the greater the amount of curvature. Okay. So as the ball moves faster, a spinning ball, generally up to a certain point, is going to have, and at sea level, it's about 70 to 80 miles an hour, is going to have, as the velocity is higher, it's going to have a greater pressure difference across it. For a golf ball, actually, if it's going 100 to 150 to 180 miles an hour, as you increase the velocity, you increase potentially the amount of curvature. So here's Bubba Watson. He's well known for putting slices and hooks deliberately on a ball. So he's left-handed. This would actually be a slice as it's going out to his left, and he sees, well, it's kind of going out of bounds. Doesn't look like it's going to be really a good shot. So golf balls can have a really high spin rate, 3,500 to 4,500 RPMs, and you could be looking at ball speeds up to 185 miles an hour plus among the professionals. And with a side spin, you can get really super large curvature. Obviously, if you throw a softball like 20 miles an hour, you're probably not going to get to the curve very much. But if you can throw it about 50 miles an hour or more, you can get a significant amount of curvature. For a baseball, it takes about 60, 70 miles an hour before you see lots of curvature. And that's kind of where baseball pitchers like to be. It's really hard, even if you're giving it all an effort, even with a major league pitcher, to get a curveball to go a little faster than that. Some can throw what's a modified curveball, it's called a slider, and they can get that to go 80 to 85 or so. But at those speeds, a baseball will definitely curve if you can get enough rotation on it, like 2,500 plus RPMs. Okay, so again, with this Magnus force, we've got Bernoulli's principle acting, but the main issue really we think is air wrapping. As a ball is moving right here from left to right, and we've got topspin on it, some of the air molecules are going to be dragged behind it and then downward. As more air molecules or airflow goes downward, there's consequently a force in the opposite direction that goes upward. So we'll take a look at a golf ball spin in just a few moments. We're going to go down and take a look at a few other things. With turbulence and air wrapping, what we do is we deflect the wake. Actually, when the ball starts spinning, the wake becomes narrower, but it also gets deflected. So if you see this example where we have some backspin, the ball's moving this direction, the air molecules are moving from right to left, what we see is air molecules being thrown down and backwards, and you can see more turbulence behind and underneath the ball. That's helping to increase pressure on the bottom of the ball, decreasing pressure on top because the air is moving a lot faster, and because of these air molecules being thrown down, we have consequently this force up, which is going to maximize that Magnus force. Okay, in golf, we take advantage of, there's something called a boundary layer. We see it when any object is spinning, especially something that's ball-like. And the idea is that a rough surface is actually going to create, as the ball is spinning, a boundary layer. And what the boundary layer is areas of micro turbulence right around the ball that make it literally slippery in the air. And it makes it easier to throw air molecules behind it, either down or up or to the side. So it actually can enhance the curvature as well as allow the ball to travel at a faster speed. So the backspin in golf is really important with that upward force that allows the golf ball to stay in the air and travel a lot farther than when there isn't a significant backspin on the ball. So for example, when a couple hundred years ago, when people were first starting to play golf, they noticed that if the ancient golf ball, which originally was smooth, got banged up a little bit, it went farther. The more, it was kind of like the baseball pitchers we talked about a moment ago, who would scuff up a ball, with sandpaper, put a foreign object or something on it. So as the surface gets rougher, it actually creates a more significant boundary layer. That boundary layer literally makes it slippery. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to switch. I'm going to go to a video again. We'll do this a few times. So hang on. I'm going to pause the video again. Hopefully this is working. Pause. Okay, we're back. Hopefully this will work. So we're going to look at the science of golf and why golf balls have dimples. So the story is very similar to what I mentioned a moment ago. And they actually test these things. The USGA does, US Golf Association. So as you probably know, in golf, things are more and more about metrics. Golfers are turning into athletes. It used to be just a game. Now it's actually a true sport because they're focusing on power. They're focusing on the physics. They're focusing on all kinds of aspects to hit the ball farther. Way back in the day, only basically Jack Nicklaus could hit the ball 300 plus yards. Now the average on the men's tour is over 320 yards. The women's tour, it's getting closer to 300 yards. Michelle Wee and a few others can hit the ball easily 300 yards. They can generate clubhead speeds of 120 to 130 miles an hour, ball speeds of 185 plus. So one of the advantages is this boundary layer. When you combine it, when you have a spinning ball, it can produce this boundary layer that allows the ball to be able to stay in the air. You're going to get a larger Magnus effect, and that thing is just going to take off. So let's take a look here.
It's one of the most recognizable designs in all of sports.
It's a small sphere. It's about 1.68 inches or larger, and it has a lot of valleys or dimples in the surface.
What makes the golf ball so unique is not just its small shape, but hundreds of small impressions or dimples on its surface. Steve Quintavala is an engineer in the Equipment Standards Department at the United States Golf Association. He says dimples are crucial to a golf ball's flight.
A golf ball has dimples to reduce wind resistance or aerodynamic drag. When you reduce it, you can make golf balls go a lot farther.
Early golfers using smooth golf balls realized that the more they used a ball, the farther it would go.
The reason for that they quickly discovered was that the surface gets scuffed and knocked about. They started figuring out, hey, we're going to put round impressions, round dimples in.
As a golf ball flies through the air, the airflow interacts with the surface of the ball and can greatly affect the amount of drag.
So if a ball isn't spinning or rotating, there's a lot of drag behind it. So think about a boat going through the water. But if the object starts spinning, then it actually reduces the amount of drag, which is going to create a smaller pressure difference across it, and it's going to slow the ball down less in the forward direction. But what it's also going to do is allow more curvature.
The wind is meeting the surface here and pushing against it, and then wrapping around.
If the golf ball were smooth, The air flowing closest to the surface of the ball would follow the flow of air around it, creating a detached airflow behind the ball.
As air flows around the smooth golf ball, it becomes detached. The air that's closest to the surface doesn't want to stick to the surface. It wants to stick to the fast-moving flow.
The detached flow causes a wake to form behind the ball, which creates a low pressure zone. This zone is what causes drag.
And that's almost like a vacuum. That's sucking the ball back and slowing it down in the face of the wind.
Adding dimples to the ball changes how the air flows over it. As the air travels over one of the dimples, a tiny pocket of turbulence or air disturbance is created on the surface.
It tries to go,
And that makes the ball actually more slippery, so it can slip
and
through
then
the air
has
and reduce
a
the amount
region
of
where
air
it's
drag.
actually detached. But then, by the time you get to the next dimple in the ball, it reattaches itself. And in the process of that detachment, reattachment, that's what creates the turbulence.
Instead of impeding the flight of the ball, these tiny pockets of turbulence allow the closer layer of air to travel tighter around it.
Because these dimples have caused some low-level turbulence. It's mixing the high-speed air from out here and bringing it close to the ball so that that flow can remain attached to the ball.
A more attached airflow creates a smaller wake, and thus
But the other thing that it does is if the ball is spinning, let's say it's producing backspin, that's going to allow you to throw more air molecules downward, which means there's going to be more force upwards. And that helps in this case, the golf ball to be able to rise as it's getting in flight. In fact, if you've ever played with someone who's really good at golf and they hit a drive, you can see, if you're behind them, you can see that golf ball rising. It's pretty amazing.
a smaller low pressure zone, which means less drag. Even this slight change can make a big difference.
A golf ball with dimples will go almost twice as far as a golf ball without.
Pretty
The
amazing.
dimples also aid the flight of the ball by influencing the lift as the ball spins through the air. Lift force is a result of a concept in aerodynamics known as Bernoulli's principle. The principle states that as the speed of the airflow is increased, the pressure of the airflow on the ball is decreased, creating lift. The lift is pronounced due to the dimples on the ball, which measure only 0.15 of a millimeter. Though tested for their effect, the USGA does not regulate golf ball dimples.
You can have any number, you can have really any shape. What we measure is the effects of dimples.
Yeah, for a while they had actually hexagonal dimples. Pretty cool. Okay, we're going to stop for our pause for a second, and then we're going to switch back. So hang on there. Okay, we are back. So again, with a golf ball, with that backspin, you're going to have that Magnus force going upwards. You have Bernoulli's principle. You have air wrapping. You got the boundary layer. They're all working together. So let's check out what happens. Yes, I actually did an experiment back in our old laboratory. So what I wanted to do was test the notion that if I can make, instead of having a ball, I use the cylinder. And it's made out of paper, and it's hollow in the middle, just as air in the middle. So it has a really low density, doesn't have a lot of mass. I made it a pretty good size, so the radius was pretty large. And so, and the surface is a little rough. So I have a lot of factors that are going to allow me, if I can get this cylinder to rotate, I'm going to make it curve. Now, what I did was I got basically 2 little mini videos and 2 experiments. And yes, we ran multiple trials, and yes, we actually ran statistics on it. Maybe we should have published it. We still can. So anyway, here we go. So on the left side, this is in the old research laboratory. And as you know, we've moved, and just in time for everything to shut down. So I tell you, here we go. So this is a knuckleball. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to drop this cylinder on the left side of the screen, and it's going to drop, and it's going to go kind of left, right, here, there. So like a knuckleball is very unsteady, has no angular momentum because the angular velocity is pretty much 0. And that means when you multiply by its moment of inertia, you get an angular momentum of close to 0. So let's check it out. Go. Oh, let's do that again. So notice how it's really unsteady, kind of goes to the left and right and then turns a little bit. So we did this 10 times, just like that. And then on the other side, we've got, what I did was I wanted to make this cylinder rotate. So I made a ramp and just let it go off the ramp. So it was about the same height when we drop it here versus where it starts to go off the ramp. And we actually tested how fast it would get down to the bottom and whether it curved. We didn't quantify the curvature. We should have, but you'll be able to see it. Let's go. Whoa, check that out. Let's do that again. Wow. And it's reproducible. So one of the things you can see is when it comes off the ramp, it starts curving, but it dives. It goes even faster. And that's because we have a boundary layer that's being produced. That boundary layer is the key. The boundary layer allows this thing to slip fast. It allows the air molecules to be thrown behind it and up, and that's going to help to make it curve down and also to the left as we're looking at it. So let's take a look at both of these again, kind of right next to each other. Let's see. It's getting a little tricky on me. Let's try this again. There we go. No curve, our knuckleball, and here's our curve. So notice the speed, it's a lot faster. And it's following the curvilinear path, so we actually probably underestimated the speed. If we knew the distance, we have an average time, we did the statistics on it, and for sure, with no spin, it took longer for that cylinder to reach the ground from the same height versus with spin. So we proved that when you have an object that's round, and you get it to spin, and it has a rough surface, and it's going to create that that boundary layer around the ball. And again, this is a light object; it doesn't have a lot of mass. We can make it curve, and we can make it go fast. So the combination of those two really work nicely. We have this reduced wake. We've made a larger pressure difference. We've allowed the ball to go faster. So you get lower air drag, but greater curvature. So that's what a spinning ball that creates a boundary layer can do, whether it's a baseball or softball or golf ball or tennis ball, it doesn't really matter. So let's see if we can go to the next, there we go. The next thing we're going to do is we talked about the fact that when a ball is curving, over like the last half or last part of the flight, it actually curves more than the first part. In addition, especially when a ball is coming towards you, it actually has that Magnus effect. Any curvature appears to be larger as the ball or the object is coming close to you. So part of the reason is that the Magnus force or Magnus effect, that force vector is perpendicular to the movement of the ball all the way along the path. And so what it means is that the direction of that force actually changes. So with this picture and throwing a curveball in the first part of the flight, it's towards the bottom as we're looking at, or towards his right, and a little bit forward. But over the last half, it's pointing backwards as well as to the right. And that's actually accelerating or increasing the amount of curvature. So if you can imagine an object that could stay in the air for a long time, it would have to have an airfoil on it, like a boomerang. It could actually, in time, come back to you. And that's kind of how a boomerang works. It's a combination of an airfoil or a wing. It's weighted on one side. As it curves, the amount of curvature actually continues to increase. So that boomerang can move around and come actually back towards you. So what we're going to try again is we're going to try to go to a video and take a look at that boomerang effect. So hang on just a second. We're going to go and pause the video. Okay, we are back. We're going to take a look at our video. So here we have someone who's going to show you if you want to know how to throw a boomerang, that's kind of how you do it. So you hold it on one end, and as you hold it on, let's go back, there we go. As you hold it on one end, he's going to turn it around. There we go, like that, and grab it. So you're going to throw it with this end forward, and it looks truly like a wing. So he's going to throw it forward, and as this boomerang goes forward, it's going to start curving. And it's going to curve to the left, you continue to curve, and eventually come back. So if you know how to throw it well, like this individual, you're going to see a successful throw. There we go. And now it's going to come back. It's a little hard. It's coming in from the sun. That was a good catch. That would have scared me, that's for sure. Okay, we're going to see it in slow motion again. Hang on. There we go, nice and steady. We see that curvature. The curvature is going to increase. Oh, just missed that tree. Now it's coming back, curving around back towards us. Moving pretty rapidly. It's a good thing it's in slow motion. You only got hit by one of those. Ah, there we go. I knew sooner or later we'd have a canine visitor. That's Trixie. Hello, Trixie. What's up, Trixie? Okay. So let me pause this for a second. No pun intended, Trixie. Okay, we are back. So if you want to bend it like Beckham, put that side spin on the soccer ball. That's going to allow that ball to curve significantly while it's in the air by throwing air molecules around it, like we saw in the physics girl video. We also have a little bit of Bernoulli's principle working on it as well. Now we're going to see an extreme version of the Magnus effect by going to look at this Gordon Dam experiment that was conducted in Australia with a basketball. What we're going to do is compare a basketball that's dropped with no spin, like a knuckleball, so it's incredibly unstable. Then we're also going to take a look at what the effect of the spin is. We're going to put some backspin on it, and as the ball is going to be dropped, it's going to create a pressure difference. So the air molecules are going to be moving faster on this side of the ball, and it's going to be moving slower on the other side of the ball. That's going to create a pressure difference. The force is going to be moving in that direction. We also have air molecules are going to be thrown above and to the right and towards us. That means that also is going to be pushing the ball towards the stream or the river downstream. So let's take a look at this video. So I'm going to pause for just a second as we move over to the Magnus effect at the Gordon Dam in Australia. I think this is probably near Hobart in Tasmania. So hold on a second as we pause it. Okay, here we go.
We're here at the Gordon Dam, and what we're going to do is demonstrate from the very top the effect of spin on a ball. So we're going to get a basketball and drop it from 140 meters up, one without spin and one with spin, and see what happens.
Okay, the first throw again will be no spin. This is a knuckleball. So that means that this ball should be incredibly unstable. It can curve to the left, right, back, forward, maybe some combination thereof. So let's take a look. It's going to move here, there, and everywhere, we think. So let's see if it fits that hypothesis. Check it out, goes to the right, back, boom, up, forward, boom. It took a while to get down there too.
Yeah.
just like we
Yes,
saw
it's
with that
crazy,
cylinder.
just dropping it with no spin or anything like that. And as you could see, you know, the ball was sort of doing its sway thing, so it wasn't going directly straight. It was pretty hard to predict, but it's fine. So that's really cool.
Okay, now we got the backspin on it. So let's see what happens. As the ball goes faster and faster, we think it's going to curve faster or curve a greater amount. That's also going to be the case because the farther a ball goes along in its flight, if it's able to maintain its speed, then the curvature should be enhanced. So let's see if that's true. Now backspin, not much yet. There it goes.
Go.
Almost going sideways by the time it hit the water.
Get back in the water, dude. This is where he just threw it. I literally just dropped it with a bit of spin. Like I didn't even throw it, and it just took off. Like we had no idea that was going to do that. But yes, in the water. So that was a pretty amazing experiment with some really interesting results. So the first one that we had no spin on, it dropped straight down with some lateral movement, quite a lot of lateral movement, as you would have seen. But it didn't actually go forward at all. So it was almost, you know, fell directly below where
To
it
the
was
right,
dropped, which is what you would expect.
Forwards, right
But the
again.
one where we added the backspin, it went perfectly straight, but it really took off as it gained speed, and it went, you know, close to 70 meters, I'd say, from the point at which we threw it. So 70 meters horizontally. So that was incredible. And as you can imagine, when you're doing a trick shot, all it does is highlight the complicated nature of the spin of the ball and how far it goes. If you put slightly less spin, it's going to go way shorter. If you add more, obviously it will go further. If you throw it without spin, then it's just going to fall straight down. Very interesting. We learned a lot. We were really impressed with the results. And
Okay, excellent. Okay, we'll stop again just for a moment, or I will stop for a moment and pause the recording. Okay, folks, we're back. And so the amazing Magnus effect in Australia, boy, with the backspin, it really took off. 70 meters, so that's about 235 feet or something like that. Oh, it really went sideways near the end. So fantastic. Well, that's really the end of that section. So if you want to take, you know, a break, loosen up a little bit. Now what we're going to start to talk about are materials and material properties and the human movement system and biomechanics. So we've been going, in a sense, for a test drive about how the system works all together and applications relating to acceleration, velocity, force, torque, pressure, etc. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to start to break the system apart. And to understand that, because we're going to be talking about connective tissue, skeletal muscle, etc., we need to understand the mechanical system, how it works, how each individual part works. And a lot of the way we think about health of connective tissues and even skeletal muscle is through something we call material properties. And so material properties just means how strong or stiff it is, how much it can bend or stretch, how pliable it is, how elastic it is, can it recoil after being bent or stretched or pulled? Is the material ductile? Can it bend or stretch a long way before it actually breaks, or is it brittle? Can it store a lot of energy? Is it tough? Is it resilient? So these are the things that are important in sports medicine because they determine whether injuries happen or not. So in sports, connective tissue injuries, orthopedic injuries, are the primary reason someone's not able to compete at the level at which they expect to. And also it's a major reason why when people are exercising for health or for fun, why they can't do it for a while. They've sprained an ankle or broken a bone, etc. So, excuse me, the ability, practicing safe coughing here, excuse me. When we're thinking about the health of a tendon or ligament or bone or cartilage, it's really the material properties. This is also true for skeletal muscle. When we think about constructing an artificial hip or knee, or a new, like a knee pad or a shin guard, or even a football helmet. Its material properties have a lot to do with how good it's going to work. This is also true for everything, including a bridge or a building. So the materials they're made out of makes all the difference in terms of what they can deal with. Um, Human-made materials and biomaterials in your body can take certain types of forces. A force that causes a change in shape is called a load, and we're going to talk about the 5 different types of loads: compression and tension and bending and torsion and shear, and how we're going to apply those. Different materials have different strengths against different types of loads. So concrete's really strong against compression. Rubber bands are relatively strong against tension, so's a rope. Tendons are really strong against tension. Bones are really strong against compression, for example. So here's the human movement system. So what we're going to be doing is breaking the human movement system apart and talking about each individual component. But to get there, we have to understand mechanical or material properties first. And we'll also have a lot of applications relating to prosthetics and design of everything from chairs to sports equipment, etc. Because the material properties in a golf club determine how far the ball is going to go and how accurate it is. And the same thing is true for a tennis racket. So come join us in this next journey, which will be with the human movement system. So we'll talk about, excuse me, mechanical stress, mechanical strain. We'll talk a little bit about how material properties are measured. There's something called an Instron machine that's able to do that. And we'll show you through load deformation and stress strain curves how we can make a comparison between like a healthy tendon and one that's been injured and one that's going through rehabilitation, or one that we might see in someone who's getting older with aging, and what makes them susceptible to injury, and what are the effects of exercise training, either as a preventative measure, and that's incredibly important, or in rehabilitation. Either way, exercise is absolutely critical in maintaining the health and renewing the health and recovering from injuries for these tissues in the human movement system: our bones, tendons, ligaments, cartilage, and even skeletal muscle. We'll talk a little bit about neural control, mostly related to reflexes, etc. Okay, so here we go with the next section. And we'll start with material properties. So what do we mean by that? Well, we mean whether, and this is where, in the case of a phone, if you guys don't have an OtterBox, probably your parents will bug you about getting something like this. I've got one because even I tend to drop my phone from time to time. My kids certainly do. So as soon as we buy an iPhone, the first thing we get is an OtterBox for protection. So that's a material that's stiff, it's strong, it's tough, it's able to store a lot of energy and protect this glass and steel iPhone, which are like, what, $1,100? So, I mean, you want to protect that type of investment. Does the material bend or stretch easily? Is it compliant or is it stiff? What types of loads is it most resistant to? The cells in your connective tissue can adapt to different types of loads and different magnitudes of loads. Is it brittle? Can it absorb a lot of energy? How do mechanical, hormonal, other chemicals influence growth, injury, rehabilitation? How do growth factors work? Because we're going to talk about a lot of those in terms of increasing protein production. So to build a material, you have to have something that's kind of tough. If it's connective tissue, I like collagen. You have some water, believe it or not, in there. You've got proteoglycans. In the case of bones, you also have minerals to give it strength and stiffness. So there have been a lot of advances in biomedical engineering and prosthetics and biomechanics over the past 50 years: equipment design, ergonomics, prosthetics. And the most exciting part to me, because it's directly related to where biomechanics is going, is tissue biomechanics. The reason being is we understand how skeletal muscles, bones, tendons, cartilage, ligaments work. We'll be able to protect them better. We'll be able to make them recover better and faster. Exercise training has become an important part of that, whether it's in rehabilitation or not. But the really exciting thing is when we start combining exercise with the biologics that we're going to see being developed in the next 20 to 30 years. And that includes 3D bioprinting, where we'll be able to replace parts, we'll be able to rebuild them kind of biologically, and keep in mind all of the complicated mechanics that are involved in how these tissues work. The cells, like I said, adapt to their environment. So an extreme example would be an ACL graft, where you take the middle third of usually the patella tendon, my knee's going to come up here, the patella tendon or the semimembranosus or semitendinosus tendon, and you replace that old ligament, that anterior cruciate ligament. Usually with the middle third of the patella tendon, you have a little piece of tibia and a little piece of patella still there, and you can actually glue it into the femur and tibia while running it actually through those bones. And when you glue bone into bone, it actually recovers a bit faster. So that's the primary way we do it. Once you get through 6 months of pretty tough rehabilitation and it doesn't slip, the long-term prognosis in terms of an acute injury are actually really good. So that can take, like I said, 6, probably 9 months of really tough rehabilitation. Okay. So material properties. That's based on, not surprisingly, what compounds and what type of atoms are involved, what the interaction is the material dense or not, what's the geometry like. So we'll start with some man-made materials to think about biological materials, and also these pertain to everything from football helmets to the titanium head of a golf club, etc. Okay, so concrete, for example. You would think concrete's been around for a long time, but it really hasn't. It's only been around for a little over 100 years, at least the concrete we use today. And it has to do with the kind of cement or glue that's in. It's a really special type of glue or cement. The individual components of concrete, sand, rocks, water, glue, by themselves, they don't sound really exciting. And each of them by themselves are not going to be able to hold up a really tall skyscraper. They're just not going to be able to do it. So we needed a material, and if you reinforce it with steel, then it becomes really super strong and can resist against lots of different forces. We needed a material that could really harden, get really tough, could absorb a lot of force and energy, especially against compressive loads while we're trying to build tall buildings. So before concrete was invented, if you built something, unless it was made out of steel, if it was made out of concrete, if you built something much more than maybe 20 stories, you were doing pretty well. But for the most part, it had to be made out of steel or something else. And there weren't too many people who could do that. So the concrete that was invented gets harder over time. And in fact, it will actually petrify in about 50 years because it's really super tough. So you mix sand, rocks, water, glue together. The glue or cement in concrete actually produces an exothermic reaction. So that means it produces heat. So that's why when we were talking about the Hoover Dam, that A.V. Hill and, D.B. Dill, I almost got mixed up, D.B. Dill, who helped to found the Harvard Fatigue Lab and then moved out to Nevada. He had to really think about how much fluid people could absorb and how much time they could work inside the dam, pouring concrete, getting things set up. And it was really only 2 or 3 hours. And they were able to drink 8 to 10 ounces of fluid every 10 to 15 minutes. That was about the best they could do. Gatorade took it one step further. The Gatorade type formula, the original one, the one that's used now, the regular Gatorade, not the G2. It actually has the right amount of sodium and the right amount of glucose or carbohydrate that can be broken down into glucose, so that you can take glucose across the glucose transporter in the small intestine and drag water across it, and you actually increase hydration. It's been tested even in football players. I think that paper came out nearly 30 years ago today. So we know it hydrates really, really well. So D.B. Dill had to think about how much heat was produced by concrete, and they were working in an area where it was really super hot. It was 110, 115 degrees every day, and in the canyon, probably quite a bit hotter. So steel is another material that's used often in construction. Here you can see steel girders that are going to be used in a fairly tall building, maybe a skyscraper. And that's a combination of iron and carbon. So they were able to dig iron out of mines in Pennsylvania, for example, Ohio, Indiana. The carbon came from coal mines. When you put them together, you got steel. So in what's known now as the Rust Belt, when we were able to really crank out a lot of steel, we put the coal and the iron together. And to make steel, you get a special kind of geometry or lattice work. So the material gets really super stiff. It's strong. It's actually ductile. It means it can bend or stretch a long way before it actually breaks. And it means it's also really tough. It can store a lot of energy. That's why it's great for skyscrapers. It can also deal with a lot of different types of loads. It can deal with bending loads, swaying back and forth. It can deal with tension. It can deal with compression. It can deal with torsion. That's why skyscrapers that are made of steel can be engineered to handle earthquakes pretty well, believe it or not, as well as hurricanes with wind forces up to 200 miles an hour, maybe even more. So pretty incredible. In the body, we have a construction crew, the cells, if you will, that's going to lay down proteins and carbohydrates and minerals and put them in the right geometry. That's going to determine the material properties of a bone or tendon or ligament, piece of cartilage, could be a muscle. So its strength, its stiffness, its toughness, its ductility, its elasticity. And anytime we think about something being elastic, meaning it's healthy, so that's what's going to determine the material properties. So we've gotten really good at designing prosthetics. We've also gotten really good at handling lots of different types of loads. So this is the Space Needle, the iconic building that you see in Seattle. This is the view from roughly the University of Washington. The Space Needle is roughly about 2.5 miles from downtown. Some of the skyscrapers here that have been built in the last 40 years are actually taller than the Space Needle. But because the Space Needle is closer to the camera in this view, it appears to be the tallest building in Seattle. And so that's the Chamber of Commerce view, if you will. There's Mount Rainier, of course, in the background, a dormant volcano. Hopefully it stays dormant for quite a while. The Space Needle has a design where it can take winds up to 200 miles an hour. So this steel girder design helps this to stay upright even with fierce winds. And in Seattle, the big storms are actually going to come in the winter, not in the summer. So there have been a couple of hurricane force storms in the last 10 to 20 years up in the Northwest. So there was one that hit Vancouver in the 1990s and one that hit Seattle, I think, a year or two ago. And the Space Needle and these steel girdered skyscrapers all did really, really well. In terms of prosthetics, we have prosthetics that are made of light steel and carbon and usually, I guess, titanium materials that are light, that are stiff, that can be controlled as well. So at the Rehabilitation Institute of Chicago, this is the first mind or brain controlled prosthetic leg. Really exciting. We had, excuse me, the first prosthetic arm or forearm built a number of years ago. So it's really, it's exciting. Not only can these prosthetics move, but we'll be able to control them in the future. Really exciting for people who need these. Another thing about the design of either a man-made civil engineering project like a bridge, or the aqueducts that were built in ancient Rome, or the human foot, is arch support. The arches can support tremendous amounts of force in compression. They can handle lots of bending forces. They can handle torsion. So it really makes a difference, the geometry and how you put things together. So the human arch of the foot is roughly about 1.2 million years old, and with our ancestors, it may be as old as 3 million years. So it was actually probably around before our brains got big and before we were able to use tools. Being bipeds allows us to do lots of things that we couldn't do before. So some of our simian friends are unable to do. In terms of materials that we use, sometimes they're protective materials, sometimes they're prosthetics. So artificial knees today are made of titanium, which is a light, really tough, really stiff metal, and then polyethylene, which actually replaces the cartilage in the knee. That's a fairly tough plastic. They can last a long time through the dynamic stresses that you'll see in the knee. Football helmets are made largely of Kevlar, which is incredibly tough plastic. It's incredibly strong and stiff. However, if two helmets collide, you have a very short collision, which produces a high impact force due to Newton's second law. And of course, the application there was changes in momentum or impulse. So that impulse, that delta T, as it's really small, that impact force gets really large. Okay, biomaterials on the forefront, hydrogels. They're really exciting. They're kind of like gummy bears. They're aqueous. We can put all kinds of cool things in them. We can put stem cells, growth factors, biologics. Those are medicines like antibodies. So a lot of the new medicines you see for rheumatoid arthritis and psoriasis and lupus, etc., are these antibodies for tumor necrosis factor alpha or another cytokine. They help to heal and repair and even replace what we've had before. We may be able to produce hydrogel wraps to put around injured tendons or ligaments, which is really exciting. So you're going to see a lot more about hydrogels as you guys continue to go on in the next 20 to 30 years. It's going to be incredibly exciting. Oh, the muscle was there for a particular reason. Skeletal muscle is one of the tissues that we found really good success in terms of replacement. If there's volumetric loss of muscle, and this can happen in a wartime situation with an IED explosion, it can happen with a car accident, could happen with a knife wound or bullet wound, etc. We found we've been able to replace in animal studies a significant amount of that by putting in hydrogels that have muscle stem cells, and those are called satellite cells, and growth factors like insulin-like growth factor, and basically the right soup to make everything grow. So pretty exciting as we move on. So biomaterials, really, really important. Okay, so how much time we have left? A few minutes left. So in this lecture, so what we're going to do now, you might pause a second, take another break. We're going to talk about mechanical loads here in just a second, the different types of mechanical loads and mechanical stress. So hang on in there. I'm going to pause the recording just for a second. Okay, we are back. Okay, so our final topic today are mechanical loads and then the stresses that come from loads. So a mechanical load is actually a force. The stress is basically the force that's felt on the inside of a tissue. It could be the inside of a tendon or a ligament or a bone or even a ball. So it's actually the load or force being exerted divided by the thickness. And we're going to quantify that as the cross-sectional area. So there are 5 different types of loads. There's compression, there's tension, there's bending, which is a combination of compression and tension. There's torsion, and finally there's shear forces. So we're going to go and talk about those. So again, a load is a type of force that's applied to either a material like steel or concrete, or a biological material that can alter the shape of that material. So it can contribute to a bending force. So for example, here we go. I've got 2 golf clubs here. One's an old school golf club. This was high tech or in the early 1980s. So this is a steel-headed golf club. They were pretty heavy. Steel shaft. Back when I was more macho, I could really hit this thing, I think, sort of. So I'm introducing 3-point bending. Oh, it hurts. So this steel shaft is really stiff. It's hard to bend. It's difficult. Here's my newer titanium-headed driver. Got a graphite shaft, which is basically carbon. And that's easier to bend. Still hurts, but it's a lot easier to bend because the shaft isn't quite as stiff as the steel shaft. So that hurts. All right. So again, a load can be a compression force. When a tennis ball strikes the strings on a tennis racket, you got compression of the ball. You actually have tension and bending in the strings. Muscles produce tension or a pulling force. So let's look at these individual forces. There we go, excuse me. So one of the things we're going to do is show you kind of a model of how we're going to define different types of mechanical loads. So a load, again, can cause a change in shape. We're going to look at the long axis of a bone, for example, or a tendon or a ligament, versus the transverse axis when we're trying to define these different terms. So there are exceptions. So we're going to use kind of a rod model. And assumes long bones, tendons, ligaments, muscles have a relatively rod shape with a long axis. It's not perfect. Bones are kind of fatter on the ends, right? Where we have cancellous bone and the epiphysis. Tendons and ligaments are kind of rod-shaped. Skeletal muscles are kind of wider in the middle and thinner on both ends, but they have a long axis and a transverse axis. So with tension, that's a pulling force. So if you take a rubber band and pull it, you're taking the material and you're basically trying to produce a greater distance between each of the molecules. You're pulling them apart or stretching the material. Skeletal muscle force, that produces knee extension or produces tension on an ACL. That's tension. We see this person doing some stretching. That really hurts looking at it. That's a significant amount of tension. So that's a pulling force. It's usually, but not always, along the longitudinal axis. Compression means we're packing the material closer and closer together. So with a compression force, the material is pressed literally closer together. So I'm going to try, there we go. Trying to adjust that a little bit. So with compression, let's see if I can do this. There we go. So with compression, the load is pushing the material, pushing the molecules closer together. This could be the effect of gravity, especially when we're landing and producing a ground reaction force or squeezing a tennis ball upon impact. There we go. A shear force. Let me go to bending first. There we go. Because bending forces are combinations of tension and compression. So I'm going to do the smart thing. I'm going to take the newer club because this newer club is a graphite shaft. It's not as stiff. It's not going to hurt as much. So when I produce a bending force, and this is going to be a 3-point bending force, My head is going to be producing a force in one direction. My two hands are producing a force in the opposite direction. That causes the material to bend. So it's producing tension on top of the club shaft and compression on the bottom of the club shaft. If you're skiing and fall over a ski boot, you can get tremendous bending forces that could potentially produce a fracture in a bone. Torsion is a twisting force. So imagine taking a wet t-shirt and wringing it out. Same thing with a towel. You're producing torsion or a twisting force. This is John Daly, well known for getting a lot of twist or torque into his swing. If there's a large torsion load on a bone, it can produce something called a spiral fracture. So let's go back and talk about shear. That's the last one, like rubbing your hands together. So a shear force is either a chopping force or kind of a sliding force. What you actually have are two forces that are being produced in opposite directions right along the top of each other, just like that. Not directly opposing each other, just sliding right on top of each other. So this is the springtime, unfortunately, which means severe season. So the way a tornado forms, unfortunately, is you have, especially around this area, you have something called a dry line that comes in, and you have southwest winds coming in one direction, and then lower than that, you have these winds coming out of the southeast. So the clouds are going this way, the wind near the ground's going this way, and they're sliding across each other. And when they do that, they produce a shear force. And this shear force, what that does, especially in a thunderstorm, it tends to roll the air like a cigar. So you have a tube that's being formed, and with a thunderstorm, you usually have some updraft, and so that tube can become vertical. And when it becomes vertical, then it becomes a tornado. So watch out for those. Hopefully we won't see any this season around here. The last couple of seasons, we've seen a few. So a shear force is a cutting force or a chopping force, where you have two forces that are in opposite directions. So you could be cutting a log. You could be maybe shaving some hair somewhere along wherever in your body. And that type of chopping force, that can be critical in terms of injuries, because bones, tendons, ligaments, cartilage, even skeletal muscle are more susceptible to shear loads or shear forces than any other type of load or force. So that can cause definitely an injury. Sometimes shear can be your friend. So like fluid shear, that's the shear force being produced by blood flowing over the endothelium. The more laminar that is, and the faster the flow, the better it is. So your endothelium picks that up. It signals nitric oxide synthase to release nitric oxide. Nitric oxide chills out the smooth muscle cells by increasing something called cyclic GMP. That causes actin and myosin to bind more loosely. The blood vessel relaxes, opens up. The wider the diameter of the blood vessel, the more blood that can flow through it. So this is critical with exercise, for example, in heart coronary arteries, in your skeletal muscle during exercise, because you need more blood flow. So fluid shear is what we call this. It actually helps to stimulate the release of nitric oxide synthase and reduces some of the NADPH oxidases, pro-inflammatory chemicals, and proteins and pro-oxidant oxidative stress related proteins. NADPH oxidase is one of those. Your mitochondria also can produce lots of reactive oxygen species. If someone's on a high-fat diet, or they have type 2 diabetes, or they're older, etc., or have muscular dystrophy. But shear forces can actually be helpful, because they're usually a signal that you have good laminar flow. That's what we're looking for in a blood vessel. Where we see turbulence is usually at a bifurcation, a splitting, for example, of a blood vessel, an artery, or usually an arteriole. When that happens, you can get these eddies, these pieces of turbulence forming. And that's where nitric oxide synthase levels are low. This is the enzyme that produces nitric oxide. This one's called enos, and enos is located in the endothelium. And we know from a series of experiments that it produces the molecule nitric oxide that helps to dilate blood vessels when there's an increased fluid shear. It's not the only mechanism during exercise that increases blood flow, but it's one of the major ones. Enos and related compounds probably account for at least 50% of the dilation that you see in these vessels during exercise. Where enos levels are low, where nitric oxide is too low, that's where you see atherosclerosis. So that area becomes imbalanced. There's too much oxidative stress, too much inflammation, not enough nitric oxide. When that happens, you get invasion of inflammatory cells. And that causes havoc, because what that does is it damages the smooth muscle cells. You start to get a buildup of connective tissue and a buildup of gunk and other things, even calcium over time. That can narrow the arteries and increase the risk of a blood clot forming. So that's something we definitely don't want to have happen. So I've got a little video to show. Maybe this is the last thing we'll do today. Let me try this. So I'm going to pause just for a second. All right, howdy, we're back. So we're getting right about to the end here. Maybe a little video, maybe a little slide, one more slide. So what we're going to look at, this is a stream flowing over a rock, and on the back side of the rock, that's where you see the turbulence. So where we see turbulence and eddies in the blood, that's where atherosclerosis forms. So this is why fluid shear becomes important. During exercise, believe it or not, this flow gets smoother in the blood, which is really cool. Okay, so let's go. There we go. You can see that turbulence forming behind the rock. There's laminar flow over the rock, but turbulence behind it. It's where you see turbulence like this. That's where we get the imbalance between inflammatory proteins, oxidative stress, and nitric oxide. Okay, let's pause just a second and we'll finish up. Okay, howdy, we're back. And so in the real world, hold on. Okay, we really are back. Sorry about the technical difficulties there. There we go. So in the real world, we have combination loads. That's what happens. We get bending and shear and compression, torsion, sometimes at the same time. This could be good news or bad news. Like with the skiing injury, we can have these combination loads. So if we just have shear by itself, boy, that can really cause some problems. When we combine it with like bending, compression, and torsion, you can get some spectacular fractures. So here we see a compound fracture. You usually get a compound fracture in a bone where you have this combination of shear force with compression, maybe some torsion, some twisting forces. When you put those together, really some bad things can happen. But overall, we can deal with it. So stress, hopefully you're not feeling too stressed. Hopefully you're relaxing with your family, wash your hands a lot, and practice social distancing, all right, learn to salute and all kinds of stuff. So we're going to talk about stress and strain next time, and material properties, how we actually measure those on an Instron machine. So that's it for lesson 1, or our meeting 1 for this week. We've got another one coming up. Expect that to be uploaded tomorrow, Tuesday. This is Monday afternoon by the time I finish with this. So I should be able to upload this on eCampus pretty soon, and I will send you an email before you even see this or hear this possibly. So wish you and your family and everybody good health, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.